Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. We have our special guest today, Brant Cooper. Brant Cooper helps organizations big and small innovate. He's the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, The Lean Entrepreneur, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, and his most recent book that came out last fall, Disruption Proof. He's the CEO and founder of Moves the Needle. He's a trusted advisor to startups and large enterprises around the world with more than 25 years of experience in changing the industrial age mindset into digital age opportunity. He blends agile, human-centered design, and lean methodologies to ignite entrepreneurial action from the front lines to the C-suite, and he surfs. Welcome, Brant.
Thanks for having me. I actually don't surf much anymore. I tell you, the water's too cold at my age and there's too many people out. So, but back in the day.
Well, I know you had a couple references to it in your book that I thought were very interesting. Also, I noticed in your book you referenced many movies, which I thought was very interesting. So, you had a lot of analogies from the movie scenes. So it was very interesting to me. But
that's a great way to tell a story, right? And they do that better than anybody. And so I think that's probably where that comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find myself doing the same thing for the exact same reason, because there's a lot of nuggets to be able to do that. So that's awesome. But even with all the things I just mentioned in your intro, I am sure that I missed something important. So I want to get from your viewpoint the insights into your career path that's led you to write all these books and become a speaker.
Yeah, it's one of those things you look back on your life and sometimes you can find that thread that runs through it. To me, I never considered myself an entrepreneur. I was never the idea person or whatever. But I always wanted to do things differently. And I sort of joked that the first jobs that I got out of college, my managers would pass me around like a hot potato because nobody wanted to manage me. And maybe that was because I wasn't a very good employee. But the way I like to think about it is because I didn't want to do what they told me to do. I wanted to do things my way. I wanted to do them what I thought were better ways. And so it wasn't until I joined my first startup, which was Tumbleweed Software up in Redwood City, up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I realized that there were actually companies that existed that they wanted you to do it your way, that you wanted to figure things out. That was your job, was to go, and we're not going to micromanage you. You got to go figure it out and drive impact for the business. And that was really where I first sort of caught the glimpse of the difference between the two worlds, sort of this command and control, hierarchical, do what you're told, and then this other one, which is more what we would call entrepreneurial. So I was just fixated in the startup scene up there and lived through the .com boom and bust, and had some successes and some massive failures and some in between and all the rest. And it was really sort of looking back on what made the successful startup successful that led to the writing of the books. And that kind of launched this whole new career. As originally we were focused on startups. What's the blueprint for actually creating startups that succeed? To, big companies aren't very good at launching new products either. So how do we bring this into the large enterprises? And that's really where Moves the Needle came in for the last 10 years, teaching them how to essentially deal with uncertainty, which is what startups do well.
Yeah, they do. And, this whole kind of concept of the intrapreneur, where there are folks who are employees who have this entrepreneurial spirit and maybe see things that they could be doing with the product or service that they already offer within their organization to help make it better, or to extend to their audience or their customer base.
So it's extending what you already have, and then it's maybe creating something new that's a little bit different, tweaking the technology or going after an adjacent market, or it could be, quote unquote innovation, inventing something new. And I guess what the conclusion I've come to and this is an interesting discussion around the pandemic, is that it's really everybody's job to have some amount of entrepreneurial spirit. And so there's no longer, to me, oh, this is the entrepreneur's job. It really is everybody's job to be entrepreneurial, which is also very similar to startups. So everybody wants to think of startups as being entrepreneurial only, but the whole point of being a startup at the beginning is learning what you don't know in order to create the blueprint that you execute on. So right from the get-go, as quickly as possible, you want people that are both execution oriented as well as entrepreneurial. And so it ends up being that that's the blend that's required, because everybody faces uncertainty. And so they maybe have to be more or less entrepreneurial than other parts of the company, but everybody needs part of that.
I totally agree with that. So in one of the introduction sentences you had in your book, Disruption Proof, I thought was very telling. And I thought it's worth some investigating. You have a sentence that says, we have to own the disruption. We have to own the disruption. It's a very interesting way of looking at digital transformation. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's kind of this mythology in the innovation industry around disruptive innovation and all of this tech that's going to come and destroy your markets. And I think that there was a period where that was true. And I'm a big fan of Clayton Christensen and Innovator's Dilemma and all that. But I think that era is over. And so I think that the problem with people that are sort of perpetuating that idea of what disruption is that they buy into this idea of an ambidextrous organization, which means that 95 or 99% of your companies should be focused on execution mode, pure execution mode. And then there's this tiny little group over here, 1% of your company or something, that is responsible for doing this disruptive innovation. And it just doesn't work that way. What's actually more prevalent is these external events that happen, say like, I don't know, the pandemic, supply chain shocks, ransomware attacks, war, inflation. All of these things have always happened, but now because of the digital revolution, because of how globally interconnected we are, because of the speed of information and even the speed of disinformation, all of those events now ripple across our economy. They ripple across our business. And so to me, the new normal is endless disruptions. And so the pandemic, we're not going back to the way it was before the pandemic. The pandemic was still like maybe the biggest example of that, but we've got other ones that are coming. And so we actually have to adapt the way we manage and structure our businesses to be able to deal with the fact that we're going to have we live in this completely, crazy, complex world filled with uncertainty. That's the new normal. So this rigid information only comes from the center of the company and top down and command and control. It's not going to work anymore. We're going to break every time we're disrupted. And so that's owning the disruption means, no, we have to deal with these disruptions that are going to happen on a regular basis. And so we need to think about what's the way we organize and structure, manage our work so that we can respond to those disruptions.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of carrying on to that, in your book, you were talking about company and organizations having to be rad. I mean, I suppose that's from that Southern California viewpoint. So tell me more about a rad company.
Right. So this is the organization that is able to respond to the uncertainty. So you're rad, which to me means that you're resilient. And number one is that you've got this strength that's built into your organization. That strength can be your competitive differentiation. It could be technology, it could be intellectual property, but it also could even just be sort of this DNA that the founders brought to the company. It could be an ethos. And so you have the strength of the building from there, but you remain flexible, like the tropical tree on the shoreline. You're rooted to the rocks or to the shore, but in a big storm, you can actually bend without breaking. And so that's the idea of resiliency. And then your A is for aware. And so that's building into the organization your ability to see the changes that are on the horizon, as well as those that are maybe happening immediately. And so, our customers are very agile. They can change their minds overnight. Social media and review sites and all of these things make us more aware of what a company is up to than ever before. And they may leave us tomorrow. And that's even in the B2B world. They can switch so much easier. So we have to be closer to the customers to understand what their needs are and their aspirations and what's happening on in their environment that might lead them to change. But it's also, hey, there's these factories that are closing in China in December of 2019. What's going on there? Is that going to affect our customers? What's the root cause of that? Right. And so you discover, oh, well, it's the pandemic is already shutting that down and it's not going to affect us for several more months, but we better get on top of it. Right. So that's increasing awareness of these things that are going on in the world that might affect our business. And then the final D, dynamic, is that being aware is not sufficient. We actually have to build into the organization the ability to change what we're up to based upon the new information. And so that's sort of this very, being agile. It's like if you were Nokia in 2005, you come up with a 5-year plan for your flip phones. 2007, the iPhone comes out. 2008, iPhone takes over the world. In 2009, here you are still manufacturing your flip phones, and that's it. Maybe you're in trouble. So we have to be able to act on the new information. That's rad.
Gotcha. So I had a question regarding resiliency. And I guess it comes back to some of the things that we've been seeing currently. You have this strong resiliency, and you have, for example, you mentioned the tree that bends in the wind. Is it possible that a strong resilience could actually keep you from doing the adaptation to become more dynamic? In other words, we have companies now who have, for a couple of years, had been working from home and employing folks differently from a hybrid workforce perspective. But now they're demanding that return to work because that's the way they did it before. So they're resilient in terms of they were able to adapt during that period of time. But now they're trying to swing back to a situation that was prior to this working quite well, but maybe doesn't now reflect that adaptability and the dynamic view of the world. So how do they interplay? How does this resiliency and agility interplay?
Yeah, it's the opposite of resilient is maybe brittle, right? So it's but on the other hand, you don't want to change too easily, right? I mean, it's not like that you want to just go whichever way the wind blows, right? And so, if you've got the flexibility but not the strength, then you're the tree maybe that topples over, right? So it's an interplay between the resilience and the aware and the dynamic. And so you need to be basing your information, like whether you're going to stick with your remote or some sort of a hybrid versus bringing everybody back to the office. What's that based on? Are you looking at evidence? Have you done empathy work with your employees to understand what they're facing and what their aspirations are? Did you actually really lose productivity? So why are you making the decision? And so it ends up being that you're using awareness to understand that it's really our strength is our people. And so we need to give to them a little bit so that they can go and be the best employees that they can. And so we have to change our policies, and that makes us dynamic. And so there's not one rule. It's the interplay between those three things that allows you hopefully to make the right decisions. I think that some of the other elements that I talk about, things like empathy, will help you understand what the ramifications of your policies are, right? So it doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily do what everybody wants, but you can at least understand that what the implication is by making a particular decision. It also means that you're running experiments or starting small and running pilot programs. And so you're doing that. We kind of built that stuff into a lot of our customer interactions. We have to think about how to do that internally as well. And so your internal HR team can act like a startup, a quote unquote startup, right? They're going to go and seek to understand their internal customers better. And they're going to brainstorm ideas on how they can achieve a particular objective. And they're going to run experiments, try to figure out which is the best way. And they're going to cut through their assumptions, and they're going to look at the data and the evidence to cut through their biases and see which programs work best. And so it's sort of practicing those entrepreneurial spirit aspects, even internal in the company, in order to hopefully ensure as best you can that the actions that you're taking are the best for the company.
That makes sense. Well, we talk about organizations in general. Let's talk about both governments and corporate entities. So they don't run themselves, right? And you mentioned there are people who direct the mission. They think strategically, then they finally execute on stuff. One of your 5 E's you mentioned just a moment ago talks about a little bit of that, but disruption that looks like a whole lot like factors that shape this organizational culture. How do you explain these 5 E's and the way that that culture is built off of that?
Yeah. So without spending too much time on it, the 5 E's are empathy. So I just described understanding your customers or other people deeply, uh, exploration, which is really admitting when you don't know. So you can go into learning mode and go figure things out. So you have to kind of start with like, okay, I don't have all of the answers. How do I actually go find the answers? And then, evidence. So I'm going to use data and insights to help cut through biases and help that inform the decisions that we're making. Equilibrium is this idea that I talked about earlier, where you're balancing the execution with the exploration work, depending upon how much uncertainty is in your role. And then finally, ethics. How do we build our values into the behavior? They can't just be plastered on the website. And so those are the 5 E's. And most of those things I think are they're kind of buzzwords on your website now. Probably it's like, oh, we're the most innovative, XYZ, or you'll list out your values, and yet you don't hold people accountable to the behaviors that represent those values. And so I think that the culture is what you're actually doing rather than what you aspire to be doing. And so to me, like, if you want to change your culture, then you need the leadership to say, okay, we're going to do this change and we're going to invest in it and we're going to do new training and we're going to do where the leaders are going to get new skill development. We're going to walk the talk. But the actual change comes down to the people in the business and it's their behavior. And so it takes a long time, and you need to practice that behavior, and you need to measure the behavior the right way. And that's how you start going down the changing of the cultural path. I think the bottom line is the culture is not the value statements that you have on the website. The culture is really reflected in the behavior of the people.
So, talk about people's behavior. The Great Resignation, as we all know, it's impacted companies and governments in a pretty negative way. Certainly, the wage expectations are one of the factors, but there's lots of other like social issues and work-life balance and whatnot. How can a rad company who depends on people to build innovation solutions address this people issue without breaking the bank?
To me, it's start with the empathy work. Start with understanding what it is that your people are, what are they feeling? Why do they not want to come back to the office? How can you encourage them to come back to the office sometimes rather than a fixed hybrid policy? In my estimation, I sort of write in the book that how team is the new unit of work. And I think that we have to get away from managers that are managing the performance of individuals. They need to be managing a team. The team is assigned a mission. You draw a straight line from the team's mission to the group mission, to the department mission, to the business unit mission, all the way up to the company's missions, so that you can see how the performance of the teams is affecting the performance of the company. Individual growth and skills and mentoring and career development can be a different reporting path. But if we can build the social structure into a team, the team holds each other accountable to the work. The teams will hold each other accountable to the ethics. If somebody's having a bad day or a bad week, that won't affect the performance of the team typically. Having managers manage a team rather than focusing on each individual frees up the manager's time so they can actually be more strategic. They're now allocating resources towards their group or department mission, and they become more proactive instead of just fighting fires. And so that really requires a lot of trust building between the managers and the team members to be able to get to that point. But it makes so much sense to me, and it really frees up all these resources and makes people proactive. And what's amazing is that just doing that, your employees feel more empowered. They're responsible for contributing to the team's work, and the team's responsible for figuring out how to get the mission done. That makes individuals more creative. It leverages their creativity and their intelligence, which also makes them happier employees. And so it's really it's almost sad to watch, right? It's really micromanaging, command and control nature of business that has forced employees into feeling like, I don't want to do this anymore. And the company's responses tend to be, well, you got to come back to the office then. I've got to see that you're on your Zoom call, 8 hours a day. And so it's this sort of reflexive sort of, oh, I got to manage tighter, when it's almost exactly the opposite of that. It's like, how do I actually build this structure where I've hired all of these intelligent people. How do I build the structure so that I get to leverage their creativity and their intelligence to drive impact for the business? And oh, also, by the way, if I'm successful at doing that, they're happier employees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we start looking at changing the mindsets at that executive and managerial level. It can be a really powerful springboard towards creating that innovation and the transformation that you're looking for as an executive team. How can these leaders cultivate champions amongst the folks in their organization within these teams without impacting their current mission, which their expectations for delivering on currently? So you have this concept of creating innovation, which brings out that creative aspect, but you also have to deliver on today's things you got on your plate. How do you balance that?
So it's a great point that you bring up, because really what those leaders need to be doing is, where is there uncertainty in our core business? Where is there uncertainty in our current mission? And a matter of fact, that's really where most of them face their massive amounts of uncertainty. Why are they going to worry about what's going to happen 5 years down the road if they don't know what's going to happen 1 year or 2 years? It's just like common sense, right? And so what they have to do is think about, what are the gaps between what we're doing now, what we're executing on now, and where we're supposed to be? That's uncertainty. So what you can do is take that bit of uncertainty and say, okay, well, we're going to tackle that uncertainty with some of this quote unquote entrepreneurial spirit. So we're going to spin up a team. So I'm going to create this team dynamic, and I'm essentially going to assign them closing that gap of uncertainty. And this is how we're going to measure the success of that. But also, this is how we're going to measure what our progress towards achieving that goal, to progress towards closing that gap. And then as a leader, I'm going to step back and go, okay, you guys figure out how to solve that problem. And so you could start with lower risk elements of uncertainty in order to start building that trust, or you could just go for it because you know that you've got smart, able people. But it's not innovation, it's innovation mindset. And so it's, how do we tackle the problems that we face on a daily basis with an innovation mindset? And to do that as a team that's practicing those 5 E's, that starts driving the culture change, especially because I'm confident those teams will start having successes. And then you're shining a light on the successes and you're congratulating people. You might even throw them a bonus or something like that, but you're celebrating the successes. And then everybody else starts pricking up their ears going, well, that's kind of interesting. How do I get that in my group? And that's really can start this whole virtuous cycle going.
That makes a lot of sense. I think you hit it on the head there, that by allowing and empowering your employees, they can now feel like they can bring out that entrepreneurial spirit, but that has to be encouraged within the broader organization.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's what, even if they don't consciously know that's what they want, that's what most of them want. Some of them maybe just want to do their 9 to 5 and go home. And so there are roles in the company where that serves fine. But if you've got uncertainty, if there's a gap between performance and what your goals are, then this is a very effective way of closing that gap. Meanwhile, you're inspiring your people. And, just my experience with dozens of companies, 70, 80 plus large enterprises, global brands, huge percentage of the people want to drive impact for their business. They want to, it makes them feel like they have a more impactful life. They're contributing to something. And so, boy, that seems like it's a good fit. The company needs it and the people want to do it. So, how do we get them together?
So in those organizations that you've seen, has there been common themes that have been holding that back?
I think a lot of the common theme is this, we don't have time for that. That's innovation. And we're not the innovation group. I don't have innovation in my title. we don't have time for that. We have to hit our numbers. And I just don't buy it. Every company has time to schedule exploration days. So exploration days might be bringing in customers or solving some of these internal problems. It's like a hackathon, but instead of building a solution, you're figuring out the problem and how you might be able to tackle the problem. And if you put it on the calendar, you suddenly have time for it. As long as you have time to schedule something on your calendar, you have time to put this on your calendar. You have time to do it. And so what I like to say is that exploration improves the efficiency of execution. The only way execution by itself is more efficient is if you have zero uncertainty. And if you have zero uncertainty, more power to you. Go do it. Blow the doors off. But I don't buy that either.
Yeah, I can't imagine there are many businesses out there that have zero uncertainty. And if they do, they're probably in decline, right? So as you look at this,
I never thought of that before. It's like, yeah, no, we're certain we're going to close our doors.
Exactly. So as you look at the this empowering of employees, you're empowering them with the time to do this exploration, but you're probably need to empower them with some tools as well. And what we've seen with the introduction of different types of tools, there's technologies out there that can support that type of things. Certainly, we've seen the rise of robots, both hardware and software robots. How do you see people undertaking new roles using automation to help transform the way they are doing their execution? Because that execution drives the business, it's driving the business forward and getting the dollars in the door, satisfying customer requests and whatnot from a transactional perspective. But how can you empower with an automation mindset or to be able to leverage new tools, allowing people to do that exploration to improve their execution?
Yeah. So automation is great. I'm all for automation. I think that the mistake is automating before you understand what you're automating. And so I think that happens a lot. People look for the tools first, as opposed to figuring out what
understanding the actual processes, right?
Totally. Exactly. I'm sure that's where you come in and help them. But it's really funny in startups too. It happens all the time, right? Like investors will tell a marketing group inside of a startup, they're like, oh, well, that's not scalable. And my argument is figure out how to do it in analog, in person, and then figure out what part of that can be automated. And now you're good to go. And so what the powerful thing is about what you're saying is that the more people that you have in exploration mode, because you've automated the execution, the faster you'll grow. Every time you automate an execution, you're increasing the velocity that you can move at. And so this is not laying off anybody because of automation. Robotics is interesting, and there's economists that you can read that'll tell you that if you automate some jobs, you're actually creating more jobs. And then you can automate other stuff, and it's actually a net job killer, which is not great for society. But focusing on automation that creates more jobs, it's because the resources that you free up to do more exploration. So if you think about this broad definition of uncertainty that I've given and what the role is of exploration in solving for uncertainty exists wherever you're trying to figure out what the bottleneck is to your next growth, which we've touched on some of these, right? It could be a sales script that's not working anymore. It could be that we're trying to tackle we need new messaging. It could be that we're going after an adjacent market. It could be that we need to tweak the products to go after a different market. It could be that if we totally tweak these products, we can go after a brand new market. We can maybe think of new products to sell to existing markets. All of those things represent uncertainty. And all of those things mean that if we solve for them, we're growing more. And so automation allows you to put more resources into solving all of the uncertainty that is stopping you from growing.
I love the way you phrase that. That's fantastic. One of the things I want to ask you that's completely off the topic is who inspires you? Because you seem like you're a very dynamic person. And just based on your career and the growth that you've had, it looks like you've had opportunities to do some interesting things. Who inspires you the most?
Wow. I don't even know the answer to that. It seems like I should have a really good answer for that. I mean, I think it's just happened it's just happened differently over time. It's almost like I think I've gotten inspiration almost as if I was overcoming uncertainty with inspiration. And so I think for the longest time, it was my dad. And then maybe for a while, it was one of my or both of my younger brothers. And then maybe it was my older sister. I don't know why. She's just a powerful woman and done so many great things. And then it's my kids. And then it's a book I've read, like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I can think of a couple of former bosses, the CEO of Tumbleweed that I joined. And I kind of remember when he stood up in front of the company and said, listen, our job is to go change the world. And so to me, that gave me a kind of a different perspective versus like, oh, really? I really hope we go public so I make a lot of money. It was really more about, no, this is what's driving us. And lo and behold, the next company that I joined, I was the head of marketing and product management, and the founders were not really very inspiring speakers. And so it was me who was standing up in front of the company going like, hey, we're going to go out and change the world. And people rally around that stuff and it creates passion and it's a lot of fun. So there's a couple of more examples, but it's that's probably the worst answer you've ever gotten to that question.
Actually, no, I can feel your passion, and I totally understand when you have a lot of different sources of inspiration that mold who you are and how you see the world. You are going to have that, again, multifaceted viewpoint on inspiration. So I appreciate your answer. It's a good answer. And finally, so you mentioned book. Okay, so are you a big reader?
I'm not a big reader. I mean, I do the research, but I don't, and I used to read fiction a lot. And I need to get back to the fiction, I think. It's the world a little bit better.
So do you have any specific books that I would find on your nightstand right now or on your Kindle?
Well, relevant to the conversation, if that's important at all, it's General McChrystal's Team of Teams, which I found super fascinating. And the reason being is that the US military, unsurprisingly, sort of reached this team of teams, this agile stuff that I'm talking about before everybody else, because they encountered the new world before anybody else. And so when they invaded Iraq back in the 90s, and it was a conventional army versus a conventional enemy, the US just steamrolled through, right? But the moment that they encountered this sort of 21st century, globally connected, networked based enemy, they struggled. And so the way McChrystal writes in Team of Teams, the way he had to restructure that part of the military to be able to respond to that is exactly analogous to what companies are facing now. And so I find that super fascinating. And that's the other thing that really is inside my book, Disruption Proof, and my speaking and my writing, is that you can't just do things today because you did them yesterday. That was fine during the industrial age, the middle of the industrial age, but it doesn't work anymore in the digital age. And so we really need to be able to cut through our assumptions and our biases and look at things from a fresh perspective. And it could be that you decide based upon that fresh perspective that, yep, yesterday's still fine. We're going to go ahead with it. But you got to be able to pause and take in this new information and evaluate whether you need to change what you're up to.
Yeah, that reflection process is pretty important to ensure that you are still on the right track, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Brant, it was great talking with you today. I really appreciate all your insight and your energy. You have a lot of passion for what you do, and I appreciate that. I'm going to put a link to their books into the show notes so people can pick those up. Again, I really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation, and I really encourage your listeners to reach out. Brant at BrantCooper.com, Brant Cooper on all social media. I respond to all messages, so really enjoyable conversation. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.